The end of my career didn't arrive with a firing notice. It walked through the boardroom doors wearing heels and a $4,000 suit. Every face turned toward me, that sharp mix of pity and discomfort people wear when they're watching someone lose, everything in real time. My presentation, 3 years of late nights and caffeine-fueled breakthroughs, glowed on the massive screen behind me, untouched, irrelevant now. My lab notebook, the original one with every formula, every breakthrough, was missing from my desk that morning. I'd told myself it was just misplaced, but now seeing my work on the screen, under someone else's name, I knew better. Sienna Ward, the CEO's daughter, moved to the front with the grace of someone who's never been told no. Her voice sliced through my sentence. There's been a change of direction. Before I could respond, she tapped her tablet, and my presentation vanished from the screen, replaced by one bearing her name. The room stayed silent long enough for the betrayal to echo. She didn't just interrupt my work, she erased it, and I hadn't even realized the erasure had already begun. At the head of the table, Jonathan Ward, CEO, mentor, thief, watched the chaos unfold like a man pretending he wasn't complicit. I folded my hands, calm enough to make him nervous. "You might want to warn the investors," I said. "They're about to see what happens when you present results you don't understand." Jonathan blinked, his composure fracturing under the weight of my calm. "You're bluffing," he said, voice tight. "You wouldn't risk everything over ego." I tilted my head slightly. "You've mistaken the silence for surrender before. You should have learned by now. I don't bluff." The clock on his wall ticked louder than it should have. Each second was a countdown, not to my downfall, but to his. He moved around his desk, lowering his voice. "Aria, the investors will be here any minute. If this data isn't recovered, we all go down. You'll never work in this field again." His words were meant to scare me. They didn't. "Then maybe it's time for a new field," I said softly. "One where the people who do the work get to keep their names on it." He froze, that moment of realization, when power shifts hands and there's no way to reverse it. "What do you want?" "To see what happens," I replied, "when the experiment finally runs without me." Outside, voices echoed. The investors had arrived. Panic flickered behind his eyes. "You think you're teaching me a lesson," he hissed. "You're sabotaging everything we built." "We didn't build it," I corrected. "I did. You just took credit until someone prettier walked in." He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "You will. Zara, my research assistant, the only one who ever noticed whose hands actually did the work, burst through the door, breathless and pale. "Jonathan," she said, "they're asking for the demo." His expression cracked completely. For the first time since I'd met him, Jonathan looked small, desperate. "Aria, please," he whispered. "I'll make this right." I smiled, faint but unflinching. "You already did. The moment you underestimated me." Then I turned, leaving him in the silence he'd once used to control me, a silence that now belonged to me. I left without another word, the sound of my heels echoing down the corridor, steady, final. By the time I returned the next morning to clear my desk, the building felt different, quieter. The air itself carried the weight of unraveling secrets. When I stepped back into the lab, chaos had already taken root. Sienna Ward, the woman who once stole my spotlight, burst in like a storm that no longer knew what to destroy. By the time dawn bled through the lab windows, The company was already unraveling. Whispers traveled faster than data, and every rumor carried my name. Sienna Ward's usual confidence had fractured, her perfect posture replaced by panic sharp enough to taste. "Dad, the lab team can't." She froze when she saw me standing there, calm, unshaken. "I'm only here to collect my things," I said evenly. "You made it clear my ideas weren't needed." Her eyes darted to her father, then back to me. "You did something," she whispered. "We can't get the process to work." I adjusted my bag and smiled just enough to make her flinch. "That's unfortunate," I said. "Perhaps you should try that alternative approach you presented yesterday." The color drained from her face. Even Jonathan's voice faltered as he tried to recover the illusion of control. "Fix this," he demanded. "We'll talk promotion, compensation, whatever you want." I met his gaze without blinking. "I already have everything I want, Jonathan." My conscience is clear. Their panic filled the room like static. My silence became its own kind of violence. When Jonathan moved to block the door, I simply looked up at him and said, "Are you sure you want to add that to your list of mistakes?" He stepped aside. "This isn't over," he growled. "Actually," I said, walking past him, "it ended yesterday when your daughter announced I was no longer needed." I didn't look back as the lab fell silent. Behind me, panic was spreading like wildfire. Ahead of me, calm, clarity, control. By the time I reached my car, the first call from the investors came through. I smiled at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Everything was happening right on schedule. My phone buzzed before I even pulled out of the parking lot. "Daniel Crest, we need to talk, urgent." I waited an hour before replying, then sent a single message. "Café Aurelia, 10 a.m. By the time I arrived, he was already there, halfway through his second coffee and his composure. The man who once funded my silence now sat waiting for answers only I could give. Daniel Crest looked nothing like the confident investor from yesterday's presentation. His tie was crooked, his composure cracked, a faint sheen of sweat betraying the panic behind his polished smile. I ordered a coffee before joining him, slowly, deliberately. Control isn't always about power. Sometimes it's about timing. "What happened in there?" he snapped. I took a sip before answering. "You'll have to narrow that down." He leaned forward. "Yesterday, Sienna presented a revolutionary process. Today, nothing works. Ward looks like he's seconds from collapse." "That sounds stressful," I said calmly. "6 investors," he continued, "80 million on the line. We need it fixed." I tilted my head, studying him. "And you think I'm the one who can fix it?" His voice softened, switching to negotiation. "Your salary was what, 110? We'll triple it. Stock options, name it." I smiled faintly. "You're negotiating with the wrong company, Daniel." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't work for Jonathan Ward anymore. And maybe," I said, setting down my cup, "you shouldn't either." He froze, realization dawning like slow poison. I leaned forward just enough to lower my voice. "You're not investing in a company," I said. "You're investing in competence." I slid a simple white card across the table. 1 number, no logo. "Call this at 3 if you want to see what actually works." Then I stood, leaving my half-finished coffee cooling between us. By the time I reached home, the storm I'd started had already spread. Every ping of my phone was another crack in Ward Biotech's foundation. The calls kept coming long after I left the cafe. Executives, assistants, unfamiliar numbers flashing in panic. I ignored them all. but the pounding on my door couldn't be ignored. When I opened it, Jonathan Ward was standing there. No entourage, no confidence, just a man unraveling faster than the company he'd built on other people's brilliance. Jonathan Ward stood in my living room, the man who once called himself my mentor, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "The investors walked out," he said. I only nodded. "You're not even surprised," he muttered. "I warned you," I said. "Silence isn't surrender, Jonathan." "You mistook restraint for weakness." Again, he ran a hand through his hair, composure slipping. "You planned this," he said. "No," I replied. "You did, every time you signed my name off the work that built your empire." The silence between us stretched. Not power, not control, just inevitability. He sank onto my sofa. "Come back. Full credit, higher position, name your price." I studied him, not the man, but the equation finally balancing itself. "Without me," he whispered, "we lose everything." "You mean everything I built while you were too busy taking credit," I said, opening the door. "Jonathan," I added quietly, "some systems collapse not because they're sabotaged, but because they were never stable to begin with." He stood there for a moment, searching my face for something that wasn't there. Regret, maybe, or mercy. When he found neither, he left without another word. The door closed with the kind of finality that doesn't echo. It just settles. I leaned against the wood for a moment, breathing through the tremor that followed confrontation. Not fear, just adrenaline leaving the body. At exactly 3 p.m., my phone rang. Daniel Crest's voice came through, steady but tight. The hours that followed felt suspended, that rare calm before results appear, when every choice has already been made. "We're ready to see what actually works," he said. 2 hours later, I stood before 6 of the most powerful investors in the city. No Ward, no Sienna, no corporate noise. Just me, my research, and the truth they'd been too blind to see. Before I began, I looked them in the eye and said, "What you're about to see belongs to me, not to anyone else." Then I showed them what real innovation looks like when it isn't stolen. They weren't questioning my science. They were questioning how I'd managed to outsmart an empire. Daniel Crest leaned forward, his tone measured but heavy with implication. "This is remarkable work, Aria. But it raises serious questions about what happened at Ward Biotech." I met his gaze steadily. "Then let's start with the only question that matters. Are you funding innovation, or just the illusion of it?" A woman across the table, Amara Liu, spoke up next. "Are you saying you've already established your own company?" "I have," I said, sliding a folder across the polished surface. "As of 3 weeks ago." Daniel's eyebrows lifted. 3 weeks? Before yesterday's presentation? I nodded. I saw where things were heading. The intellectual property belongs to me, developed independently, outside company hours, using my own resources. "Jonathan will fight that claim," Amara said. "Then he'll lose," I replied calmly. "Every step I took is documented and verified by legal counsel." Daniel flipped through the folder, eyes widening as he read. "You've been planning this for months." "No," I corrected softly. "I've been protecting myself for months." "There's a difference," Amara gestured toward me. "Then why can't their lab replicate your results?" "Because they never understood the process," I said. "They copied the destination, but not the path." Sienna saw numbers, not knowledge. The room fell into a silence so deep it hummed. They weren't just calculating financial risk anymore. They were measuring reputation, credibility, legacy. Finally, Daniel set the folder down, his expression shifting from skepticism to respect. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. I smiled, not out of arrogance, but inevitability. "Something simple," I said. "Stop investing in names. Start investing in results." The balance of power had already shifted. They just hadn't realized it yet. I didn't just walk away from their company. I built something better in its ashes. My company, I began, is called Lunaris Biotech. We're seeking investment to bring this stabilization process to market. Small team, precise mission. No bloated management, no family politics, just scientists who understand what we're building. Daniel Crest leaned forward. "And your team?" "4 of us," I said. "All experts who left Ward Biotech in the past year for leadership reasons." Amara Liu gave a slow, knowing nod. "You've been planning your exit strategy for some time." "I've been protecting my work," I corrected. The exit only became necessary once respect was no longer part of the equation. A quiet investor at the end of the table spoke up. "Explain it in simple terms." "What makes your process different from what we saw yesterday?" I smiled. This was my territory, science, not politics. "Imagine delivering medicine to a single cell instead of the whole body. Traditional treatments are blindfolded darts, unpredictable and messy. My process is a guided missile, stable until it reaches the exact target, activating only where it's needed. Chemotherapy without collateral damage, precision without pain." The energy in the room shifted. The tension of business gave way to awe. Daniel finally leaned back, studying me like a variable he couldn't quite solve. "We'll need independent verification," he said. I smiled faintly. "Of course. Unlike Ward Biotech, I don't hide my equations." Amara's gaze swept the table, voice low but certain. "Then I suggest we pause all dealings with Ward Biotech until we know the truth." I nodded, closing my laptop. "You won't have to wait long. The truth has a habit of surfacing, especially when it's buried under panic." The room went still. For the first time, I realized they weren't looking at me like a liability. They were looking at me like inevitability. I kept organizing my papers. "That sounds desperate." "He says you stole from him." I looked up, calm. "That's projection." He studied me for a long moment. "You knew this would happen." "I knew exactly who I was dealing with," I replied. The rest was pattern recognition. By the time I reached my car, the messages were pouring in. Chaos, firings, panic. Ward's empire was collapsing under its own weight. Zara's text came last. Jonathan lost control. Bells locked herself in her office. Half the staff just quit. That night, across a quiet restaurant table, Zara asked the question nobody else had. "What did you do?" I smiled softly. I understood their motivations. Ward wanted control. Sienna wanted approval. The investors wanted certainty. She leaned closer. "And you?" "Recognition," I said, "and freedom from ever feeling small again." Zara exhaled, realization dawning. "You're starting your own company, aren't you?" "Already did," I said, 3 weeks before the collapse. She hesitated. "Is there room for another scientist?" I smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." Power built on theft never lasts. It only collapses under the weight of its own lies. By morning, my lawyer called. "Jonathan Ward filed an emergency injunction," she said. "The judge dismissed it within hours. Your documentation saved everything." He was flailing now, reacting instead of ruling. Every desperate move only confirmed what I already knew. He'd built his empire on other people's brilliance. By afternoon, the industry blogs lit up with chaos. Ward Biotech's stock plummeted 15%. The board called emergency meetings. Through quiet channels, I heard that Sienna had been stripped of her title. I thought victory would feel satisfying. Instead, it felt hollow, like the silence after a fire when the smoke clears but the air still burns. That night, the security alert pinged. On my monitor stood Sienna Ward, the woman who once erased my name from my own research. News travels faster than truth in this industry. By nightfall, Ward Biotech's collapse had already become tomorrow's headline. She looked nothing like the power-draped executive from that boardroom. Her hair hung loose, her eyes raw, her confidence gone. Against my better judgment, I buzzed her in. She stepped inside, scanning the small lab that had replaced her father's empire. "This is it?" she asked quietly. "This is what destroyed us." I met her eyes. "You destroyed yourselves. I just refused to go down with you." She sank into a chair, defeated. "My father won't speak to me. The board voted me out. Everything's gone." "What did you expect?" I said. "You can't steal understanding. You can't shortcut the truth." For a moment, I almost pitied her. The version of me that might have chased approval instead of understanding. She was standing where I once had, desperate to be seen, terrified to be ordinary. The difference was I'd already paid the price. She was just beginning to understand. Her voice cracked. "How did you know this would happen?" "I watched patterns," I said softly. "While you studied my notes, I studied you." Sienna stood uncertain, her hand hovering on the doorknob, like she wasn't sure she was ready to face the world she'd helped break. "You planned this from the start," she said quietly. "No," I said. "I just created options. You and your father destroyed yours." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she turned, opened the door, and stepped into the hallway without another word. The click of the door behind her didn't sound like anger. It sounded like acceptance. The silence of my apartment lingered, thick, heavy, unfinished. I needed air. So I went back to the only place that still felt mine, the lab. There, the quiet was different, purposeful, controlled. Every beaker, every centrifuge, every quiet hum of machinery was a reminder. I'd built this from the ground up, without permission, without privilege. 48 hours after she stole my presentation, everything had reversed. Ward Biotech was in freefall. The investors were negotiating with me instead. The work, my work, would go on, and this time no one could take it. When the phone rang again, Daniel Crest's voice carried no pretense. "The board finalized their decision," he said. "Initial funding, $60 million. With performance bonuses, it could reach 100. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. The revenge was never about destruction. It was about proving they were never necessary to begin with. Daniel hesitated, his voice quieter now. "One more thing. They've removed Jonathan Ward." The boards lost confidence. I let the silence stretch, then I exhaled. "And Sienna?" "Gone," he said simply. "They're asking if you'd consider stepping in as CEO." I laughed softly, not out of mockery, but disbelief. "I'm flattered," I said. "But no, I'm building something of my own now." "I thought you'd say that," he replied. "Still, worth asking." After we hung up, I walked through the lab in silence. The hum of machines, the faint smell of chemicals. They weren't reminders of struggle anymore. They were symbols of freedom. Each piece of equipment, represented something I'd fought to reclaim. My work, my voice, my autonomy. The next morning, a courier arrived with a small package. Inside was my missing lab notebook, the same one that disappeared from my desk the morning everything fell apart. A folded note lay on top in Jonathan's unmistakable handwriting. "You've won. Was it worth it?" I held the notebook for a long moment, feeling the years of sacrifice pressed between its pages. Was it worth it? That question echoed as I stepped into the new Lunaris lab later that afternoon. Zara and the team were already setting up wires, glassware, hope. They looked up when I entered, and for the first time, I saw something that had been missing my entire career. Not fear, not envy, respect. "Ready to change the world?" I asked. Their smiles said everything. The story didn't end with revenge. It began with freedom. Because when people try to steal your light, the best answer isn't to fight in the dark. It's to build something so bright they can never stand in its shadow again. The beginning of my legacy didn't arrive with permission. It began the moment I stopped asking for it. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more Revenge Rewritten. Have you ever had to rebuild after someone tried to take what was yours? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't about what you destroy. It's about what you create next.